Granted, he's much bigger, much stronger, much more sexy and successful, so my opinion's probably invalid, but I'm gonna give it anyways.
Yeah, buddy. Lightweight, baby!
What's up, guys? I'm Josh and I Lift Things, and I'm here to talk about deadlifts. Are they worth doing? So I'm about 3 years late to this party, but professional strongman and former world record holder Robert Oberst was on the Joe Rogan Experience where he had this to say about deadlifts.
The feeling that you do when you do a physical, visceral thing, when
Right.
you feel it in your fucking bones.
Yeah, you feel it. You live it. I when I was doing World's Strongest Man in Botswana, Africa, I tore my bicep, and I just was getting beat up over and over again. I was just so wrecked. My body wasn't accepting because I went from football to strongman. And in football, we'd never done deadlifts. It was all hang cleans and power cleans, which, by the way, just quick little tip, deadlifts, if you're deadlifting to be a better deadlifter, fine. If you're not doing that for deadlift's sake, then don't fucking do it. The risk to reward ratio is a joke.
For deadlift?
Okay, so first off, quick little thing. I also play football. Always been around people throughout my life who play football. We did deadlifts. We did hang cleans. We did power cleans. And a lot of our deadlifting was more like trap bar focused. But you do deadlift in most football camps. I'd be kind of surprised to hear that a lot of people don't deadlift. Being able to produce that much force is always going to be good, pretty much regardless of the sport.
Deadlifts, if you're deadlifting to be a better deadlifter, fine. If you're not doing that for deadlift's sake, then don't fucking do it. The risk to reward ratio is a joke.
For deadlifts?
For deadlifts.
Really?
And a lot of people aren't going to like that I'm saying that. But if you go into any NFL gym, in any Division I college football gym, in any athletics where people are actually getting paid and it matters what they're doing, they're not deadlifting.
Really?
They're hang cleaning and power cleaning.
Why is that?
Because the risk to reward ratio, like it's so hard to be a great deadlifter and to not risk your low back and to be using your upper back properly, and just there's so many little chances for you to get hurt. Hamstrings, deadlift. That was me. My first war.
So that's the main part that's important there. His biggest point is that the risk to reward ratio on the deadlift is not good, primarily because it is hard to be good at the deadlift. I don't agree at all. Granted, he's much bigger, much stronger, much more sexy and successful, so my opinion's probably invalid, but I'm gonna give it anyways. You know how people say things like, this vegetable is a superfood? Those statements are bullshit. There are no superfoods. There are foods that are more nutritious or less nutritious, and even more nutritious foods still have cons. Let's take something like oatmeal, for instance. You have the carnivore snobs or the keto zealots talking about insulin spikes and fucking phytic acid. Yeah, they're very cheap, very filling, they increase satiety, actually have a pretty low insulin index, so all things being the same. Full of fiber, have some protein, and are all around a pretty decent food. Now, how the hell did I get from deadlifts to oats? Well, bear with me. Deadlifts are a tool. Now, there are good tools for a job and there are bad tools for a job. For instance, you probably wouldn't want to use a screwdriver to try to hammer in a nail. Could you? Yeah, absolutely. But the screwdriver is better suited for other things. Now, if you hurt yourself using a screwdriver the wrong way, is it really the screwdriver's fault? Or is it the idiot who decided to whack a fucking screwdriver around like a hammer? Looking at you, CrossFit, using Olympic-style movements is fucking cardio. The deadlift is an amazing movement. It's as close to a superfood as you're going to get to lifting. It uses most of the musculature in your body, translates extremely well to real-world strength, and this part is probably going to piss some people off, so sorry, Mr. Oberst. It's a pretty safe movement. So as always, shout out Greg and the Stronger by Science team, but they have a bunch of articles where they basically did some cross-sectional studies on their own reading population about injuries in powerlifting. I think point 3 here is pretty funny. Lifters who had sustained at least one acute injury were relatively stronger, competed more frequently, and were more likely to have previously dealt with a chronic injury than lifters who had never sustained an acute injury. All of those factors were unsurprisingly associated with time spent training, but were still independently predictive of having experienced an acute injury, meaning stronger lifters and lifters who competed more often were more likely to have experienced an injury regardless of training experience. So of the 1,900 people, it is essentially an even split between torso, upper extremity, and lower extremity as far as injuries are concerned. So for upper body injuries, we see shoulder joint and rotator cuff being the two biggest, with 250 injuries of the shoulder joint alone. For lower body injuries, we see a pretty close split between the adductor, the groin, and the hamstring and hip flexors, but with knee overtaking all of it with 187. And then with torso, we have the lower back losing out to the hip. And then relative types, we have a pretty clean split between joint and muscle. Acute injury was defined by answering in the affirmative to, have you ever sustained an acute, sudden injury/pain, injury directly resulting from your training? So from this conclusion here, we see that the shoulder and rotator cuff injuries were the most common for upper body, knee and adductor groin were the most common for lower body, and hip and low back injuries were the most common torso injuries. So if you want to refuse to deadlift in order to take out the second most common torso injury, are you also never going to do any pressing whatsoever to save your shoulder and rotator cuff? Are you never going to be doing any squatting whatsoever to save your adductor and groin? No, at a certain point, if you start thinking, well, this could get injured doing this, you will never do anything athletic whatsoever. For instance, this review paper by Kioff, I don't know how to pronounce that, essentially says that bodybuilding had the lowest injury rates, with strongman and Highland Games recording the highest rates. So, not powerlifting, the sport where the entire goal is to pick up as much weight off the floor as possible. The shoulder, low back, knee, elbow, and wrist hand were generally the most commonly injured anatomical locations. Strains, tendonitis, and sprains were the most common injury type. Very few significant differences in any of the injury outcomes were observed as a function of age, sex, competitive standard, or bodyweight class. That's very interesting. Bodyweight class would imply heavier weight, which doesn't alter how likely you are to get injured here. The general consensus is that powerlifters sustain 1 to 5.8 injuries per 1,000 hours of training, corresponding to 0.3 to 2.1 injuries per year. As stated by Greg, that seems like pretty low, but it does forget how long the injuries persist. Sui et al. Found that 43% of powerlifters reported currently being injured at the time of completing the survey, in spite of a very low overall injury rate of about 1.0 injuries every 1,000 hours. A more recent study by Strombach found that 70% of powerlifters were currently injured, using a pretty broad definition of injury as any condition of pain or impairment of bodily function that affects powerlifting training. These rates are very similar to team sports or any form of athletic that you can really think of. So not only, using Robert Oberst's argument, can you not deadlift, you can't play baseball, you can't do track and field, you can't go running around with your friends, you can't do any lifting in the gym whatsoever because the chance of getting injured is higher. Now he says don't deadlift unless you just enjoy deadlifting because the risk to reward ratio is bad because it's hard to perform. So what is the argument when you then compare that to, say, playing football? What's the risk and reward of playing football? The chance of you becoming a superstar multi-millionaire being paid in the NFL is insanely low, so you're doing it just because you enjoy it, with just as high of injury rates, including concussion and everything else, just for shits and gigs. At least the deadlift can train a vast majority of your body's musculature in a very condensed and efficient time. I just don't understand the thought process here. The risk to reward ratio, the risk isn't that high. The rate of injury is not that high, especially for an everyday gym bro who's not competing and just wants to get an adequate pull day in. The reward is pretty high. It's a very efficient movement that will add pounds of muscle to your body that you can easily load progressively. Another thing that really pisses me off here, going back to the argument of what is a better tool for a certain job, is when people say that the deadlift isn't a good movement for hypertrophy. Tell that to Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler, who swore on heavy sets of deadlifts to build up their back. When people say deadlifts aren't good for hypertrophy, I just think, compared to what? Because they don't have a controlled eccentric or they don't benefit from any like stretch mediated hypertrophy? Show me one elite puller, whether that's in powerlifting or Olympic lifting, who has a small back. The movement can be loaded more than any other movement. It uses your hamstrings, quads, glutes, lats, spinal erectors, traps, forearms, basically your entire posterior chain, plus your quads and your arms. And you want to tell me that that won't result in hypertrophy? This is just more bullshit from people that only believe in the dogmatic magic rep range. Now, if deadlifts hurt your back for whatever reason, at any weight or rep range, and you're positive that you understand what proper form is, don't do them. If you're just not interested in them, don't do them. I do not care. But don't start telling people that the deadlift is an innately dangerous movement or that they should or shouldn't do it because it won't grow their back simply because you don't like an exercise. And if you don't want to do a deadlift, you still have to do some type of hinge movement in order to train your posterior chain. That is a natural movement that humans should be able to accomplish pain-free. Obviously, Oberst is a freak with a ridiculous list of achievements and accolades, and he's allowed to have whatever opinion he wants. But if someone told me that and they only pulled 2 plates off the ground, my only assumption would be is that they don't like lifts that are hard and challenging. And guys, that is the video. Thank you so much for watching. Want to do me a favor? If you like this style of content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, let me know what I forgot or I'm an idiot, and maybe share to a buddy. If you really want to help me out, you can follow all of these socials. They'll be linked in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.